Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to the Chronic Health Collective. This isn't just a community, it's your fresh start. We have gathered the best coaches and experts to help you reclaim your energy, heal from the inside out, and live with purpose. Whether you're looking for more energy, deeper healing in your relationships, or a life that feels more aligned and fulfilling, you are not alone anymore. And so I am so excited for today's show. I am Jeanine, ancestral medicine woman and spiritual healer, and I am joined, by our other two coaches, Dawn and Amanda. And so we're looking forward to a really exciting and helpful conversation for today's show. And so for this first segment, we're going to talk about this idea of balancing gratitude and grief, kind of in this season where we're called to turn inward. And so, like, as we move deeper into fall and approach the holiday season, there's often this kind of collective call to gratitude, right? We are called to give thanks, to focus on abundance. And yet for so many of us, like, this season also stirs up feelings of loss, of loneliness, of longing, or what I like to call the quiet ache of remembrance, right? So as we are remembering all of the things about life that we're grateful for, we are also sometimes remembering what's no longer with us, or remembering what we'd hoped this season would be, but isn't panning out that way for us. And so today, we're going to explore how we can both hold the grief and the gratitude, right? And look at them as kind of like sacred companions rather than opposites. And so, speaking specifically like in ancestral and spiritual herbalism, we see both these energies as part of the same cycle, right? The falling away and the giving thanks, the death and the harvest, the remembering and the releasing. And so let's kind of just open our hearts to both truths, right? That gratitude heals and grief transforms. And so, so before we kind of jump into it, I'm going to take a deep breath. I invite us to take a deep breath. And I'd really love to start by hearing from each of you. I just have a few questions to kind of guide our conversation, and I'll jump in and share some thoughts, but I definitely want you all to, Amanda and Dawn, to share your own as well. And so when you think about this season, right, the shorter days, the turning inward, right? I mean, we're coming up on a daylight savings time. I think it's actually in a couple days here. How do you personally experience this balance between gratitude and grief? Like, do they feel connected or separate for you?
Go for it, Dawn.
John Campo. I love this topic of grief and gratitude, and I would agree that they're one and the same. But I think the challenge that people hold when it comes to grief, right, is the definition that they give it. And if we could give it a different definition, the experience could be totally different. I don't want to repeat myself, but it's the definition that we give ourselves of what grief is, right? And so during the holiday seasons, we've come to the custom that there's all these customs that we do for the holidays. This is how family gatherings should look like, and we run all these thoughts through our minds, and that creates the distress that we have, that creates the grief. And it keeps us from getting in our own way of having gratitude of the presence of what is around us, because we're constantly living in a different timeline of what we've lived or experienced in the past, right? And so when we can change our definitions and be in the presence of now, then gratitude can show up for us. And so I think what we don't realize is that we live different parallel realities all the time, right? We don't have to change the environment. We don't have to change the people that we're around. We don't have to change the actual experience in itself, but really it is just a vibrational shift of being in existence of in where you're at right now, but just vibrating into what we had in the past, but bringing it here today, without having the same people that we may have had in the past that gave us that love and joy, in those experiences that we recognize. Um, but by changing our vibration, we can easily shift into a different parallel reality and have a different experience. And yeah, once we can learn how to not live in the old timelines, change the definitions, that's just the first step in creating a better awareness of what grief is and how we can get to having appreciation for the things that we have here and now.
I love that. I love that. I love this whole idea too of operating in multiple realities at the same time, and the idea of shifting the frequency, right? That may sound like a deep and spooky talk, but that's really it, right? Because how many times, do we we're in a certain train of thought or whatever, and we actively say, I'm not going to think that way, right? And we shift our thinking, shift our frequency, and kind of move, and almost, it definitely does create a new reality for us, a new way of thinking, and a new idea. We shift into a different identity when we do that. I love that. I love that. So Amanda, I'm going to kind of tweak the question a little bit. Can I do that?
Oh, sure. I got all my notes here, but you go for it.
So when we're thinking about, though, right, many people feel the pressure to stay positive or be grateful, right? That kind of forced, or what is it called? The toxic positivity.
Yes.
That way. Even when they're moving through loss or uncertainty, which we have a lot going on right now with that loss and uncertainty. It doesn't even necessarily have to be loss of a loved one, right? Loss of a job, loss of a reality, loss of stability, all those things. So they're working through this loss and uncertainty. How do you invite clients, or even how do you invite yourself to honor the full range of emotion without bypassing the harder parts?
Oh, so this, when you talked about the topic today of doing grief and gratitude together, I don't think I ever put the two in the same sentence. And John, I love, like reestablishing what it is, what grief is. And I think that, we get so caught up in the definitions and what you're supposed to think and what you're supposed to feel, rather than honoring what it is that you've lost, and I think when we think of grief, we automatically think of people. And I think of, being able to honor them in how they would want us to continue on. I don't think anyone would want us to stay in that somber mourning portion of death. I think to show this, and I saw a graphic recently of the misunderstanding of grief, and they had a series of 3 glass jars. That a tiny glass jar with a giant like cannonball inside it, and the grief consumed that whole jar. And the way that society perceives that is that the jar stays the same size, and that cannonball of grief gets smaller and smaller. And I don't subscribe to that. I liked the second graphic where the jar gets bigger and bigger and bigger, that we grow to accommodate the grief, that the grief doesn't necessarily change, but it changes how much it consumes us. And I think that as we have that ability to shift it to gratitude, of the gratitude for what we had that's not here, but being thankful for the opportunity to know those people, for them to make an imprint on our life, that we now miss them, but also that we can grow through that. And so celebrating, as we bring into celebration, I think that's how that all comes in, as we grow, and we grow through that gratitude portion of things, to to grow so that grief is not all consuming, and to look at grief as being in so many different portions, and follow what's in your heart. When a feeling comes up, I encourage everyone to feel the feeling. Feel it. Stop stuffing it. When you stuff it, you are just loading a pressure cooker. So every time you're feeling happy and joyous and remembering that person or that job or whatever it is that feels griefy, when there's something to celebrate it. It's okay to have happiness and joy. And on the days when the sadness comes and the burden and the bartering and all of those other pieces, when they come in, address them. Spend 5 extra minutes in the restroom and deal with this feeling instead of spending 10 minutes stuffing it down, waiting for it to blow up. And then have the gratitude that you have the awareness to relate to it and really feel those feelings, honor those feelings. And I think that, and I'll throw in my staff social media. When social media comes up and it reminds you this is an anniversary, and it's like, oh, it's the anniversary. I'm supposed to be so sad. And so no, this is a reminder of the growth that you've made. If you didn't wake up sad that morning about this, don't let a memory on Facebook. This is not your memory. This is social media's memory. So that's my take on it.
I love that. I really do. And, just kind of in my work, and just even in my own experience, right? Because I think all of the work that we do is this outgrowth of our own experiences, the spaces where we've had to heal or where we are still healing or still working through. That is, I talked a few episodes ago about being so well acquainted with grief, having lost my sister in childhood, right? And just that whole experience of grief just like colored my entire life until I was able to transform that grief into something more life-giving, right? Into wisdom, into creativity, into deeper connection. And one of the things that I talk to my clients about, and I remind myself when I'm really feeling underneath grief, is that beneath grief is love, right? And so how can I hold space for my grief? How can I be patient with myself? How can clients be patient and loving and kind with themselves and hold space for it? Our grief wants to be held. And when we hold it, as you were saying, Amanda, that's when it then can dissipate. Maybe isn't the best word, but at least the heaviness of the feeling can dissipate, and maybe we can transform that or kind of move through that or transmute that. And so I just kind of wanted to shift a little bit as we are kind of closing out this segment before we go to commercial, and just talk about just kind of rituals and reflection for how we can honor our grief and how we can kind of ground in gratitude, because they are the same. So I want to say thank you all. This was so rich, and we're going to continue this conversation. But I just, again, wanted to offer a few simple ways that we can honor both grief and gratitude as living practices, right? And so thinking about rituals for honoring grief, like grief asks for spaciousness. Right. So as you mentioned, Amanda, and also you too, Dawn, when grief presents itself, it's asking for breath. It's asking for slowness. It's asking for ritual, whatever that looks like. And so that could be lighting a candle, right? That could be speaking their names aloud. Like that's something that we do a lot in the kind of our ancestral practices. It could be something like creating an ancestral altar with photos, or cooking a favorite food, or offering elements from nature, to remember that. The other thing that I think is also so beautiful is letting our tears be prayer. Right. And letting that be, a release. We can write a letter of release. We can bury it in the earth, right? Anything just kind of symbolizing return and renewal, but really honoring grief. That's, how, in what ways can we honor grief and not stuff it down, not pretend that it's not, to pretend that it's not there, that it's not important, that we're not hurting. And to take that grief and remember that it's very connected to love, right? That there's love beneath that grief. when I think about, as an ancestral medicine woman, when I think about the herbs for soothing and release, things that I offer to clients, right? Plants remind us that everything has a season, even sorrow, right? And so I will never stop talking about rose. Rose softens the heart. It allows love to flow even through grief, right? And so sitting with rose, consuming rose, I mean, rose oil. Hawthorn is also a good herb that strengthens a tender heart. It offers protection and courage as we travel through grief. And then chamomile and lemon balm, right? Things that calm our nervous system and kind of bring that gentle lightness back to our spirit. If I then kind of transition into like grounding and gratitude, right? Beginning each day, naming one thing that you're thankful for from your lineage, or perhaps something you're grateful for, even in this moment of gratitude. You know, if we're thinking about what we're missing, it's because something good was there, right? And so thinking about what was there and being gracious or grateful, I shall say, for what was there. I love tea, gratitude tea. Or closing each night by placing our hand over our heart and whispering thank you, not for perfection, but for presence, right? Because even in grief, we have an invitation to be present. Yeah, so I guess as I close out this segment and move into the next, the season reminds us that gratitude and grief are both sacred teachers. One opens the heart to beauty, the other to depth, and together they bring us home to wholeness. And so may we honor both with tenderness. May the roots of our gratitude grow deeper through everything we've ever had to release. Yeah, so when we come up in the next part of the show, we're going to move into Dawn, and Dawn's going to be talking about this issue more, really fleshing it out. And yeah, I guess more when we return. Healing doesn't begin in the body. It begins in the spirit. I'm Dr. Jeanine L. Williams, founder of Ancestors Bosom, a sacred space for spiritual and ancestral remembrance. Through intuitive guidance and energy work, I help you reconnect with your highest self and align your spirit, mind, and body with the rhythm of your ancestors. Together, we listen for what your spirit needs. We release what no longer serves you. We restore balance and open the path to peace, clarity, and purpose. My work is supported by spiritual herbalism, plant allies that ground and nourish your transformation. Every session is a ceremony of remembrance, a return home to yourself. Ancestors Bosom, where healing begins with remembrance. Visit AncestorsBosom.com and begin your journey home.
Why do 98% of beauty enthusiasts rave about coolness? It's all in the blend of ancient wisdom and modern science. Introducing Coolness, Pearlescent Face and Eye Serum Cream. This powerhouse combines the antioxidative power of schisandra berries, the glow of pearl powder, and the hydrating wonders of dragon's blood extract. It's like a time machine for your skin, making it radiant, firm, and oh so smooth. Inspired by ancient Chinese traditions and backed by modern nutritional science, this serum cream is perfect for dry, mature, and aging skin. It's time to unlock your inner glow with Coolness. Treat your skin to the best of both worlds today.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Jeanine, thank you very much for kicking that off. It's gratitude, grief is a really hot topic and a heavy topic for anyone to even just fathom. And there's so many different things that we as practitioners can help people resolve this in their lives. And one of the things that I like to kind of deep dive into this that we don't talk too much about it is on the emotional side. When we don't resolve those emotions within ourselves, what we don't realize is that how it affects our physical bodies, right? And so when we're speaking specifically on the topic of grief, um, the energetic meaning of that, it really has an impact on our lungs, and our lungs govern our breath, right? And that's our life. Without air, that's the first essential need for our physical bodies for us to exist in this world. And so, when we're first born, the first thing that we do is we breathe, and making that organ most connected to the rhythm and receiving and releasing of life, right? Because when our physical existence ends in this world, that's what we do. We take our last breath, and life is released in the physical form. And when grief is unresolved, the lungs can feel like tight and closed. So people feel people who have like those experiences of anxiety, or they're like constantly, I can't breathe, they're dealing with some type of grief. And deep grief doesn't always necessarily is connected to the definition of death, right? Grief could be the loss of something else, a loss of a relationship, a loss of connection, because connection is one of the primary needs in our existence as well. Air, lungs, you need water to exist, you need food, you need shelter, and connection is one of those needs as well. And the other one is creative expression. But when it shows up in the person's feeling of the feeling tightness, or they're not able to breathe, it would be like shallow breathing, or they feel like pressure in their chest. They may have like a chronic cough. They may feel constant fatigue because they're not getting enough oxygen that's feeding their brain, right? This could also cause skin issues. And I talk about this because I love to study Chinese medicine, and they talk, that's like a big thing with them in Chinese medicine's modality, is a connection of the emotions to the organs. And so emotionally unprocessed grief can create the feeling of disconnection, like you can't breathe like fully and exhale the past. And then I would say the next one would be the effects of grief would be the effects on your large intestine, believe it or not. Right? We don't think about these things, but I think this is something that we do need to talk about, of how these emotions create these enneagram stresses in these organs. And so when it comes to the large intestines, that supports our ability to let go of the things that do not serve us. And so it's the what do you call it, the waste of what no longer serves. And so when grief lingers and often blocks the channels leading to the emotional and physical stagnation, so when it comes to the large intestines, that's where people start experiencing things like constipation or rigidity of thinking, and even like difficulty of releasing detachments. And so the healing system involves restoring your flow, right? If you're backed up, that is, I mean, the physical part, you're backed up, then that also affects what we often reference as your chakras, your meridians are all blocked up as well. And so, like, what Jeanine also had mentioned about being able to release, tears is a great ritual. Like, I think growing up is especially like kids, right? We're throwing tantrums. So many times when we start to shed tears, or we throw a tantrum and we start expressing our emotions, we've always been told to what? Be quiet. Stop that crying.
I'll give you something to cry about.
Right, I'll give you something else to cry about, right? So by teaching us to suppress that, we're not allowing the natural flow to come through our bodies and release in the way that it's supposed to. And then, then you have problems. And you know what? If you think about it, right? Children have a lot of problems with their large intestines. They get backed up because they're constantly being told to suppress in itself, right? With their emotions and all that good stuff. I'm not going to go down that path today, but so those two organs, your lungs, and then of course the large intestines. So Amanda, you're in theta healing, right? And so when it comes to emotions, emotions is a big part of your practice, right? And releasing that and creating these, having people to reframe the thoughts and the feelings that they have, and stating it in declarative statements that is positive. So in your experience, like, I don't know if it's specifically based on the lungs or the large intestine, but when it comes to grief, how would you like, I guess, start with your client where they're at, and then identifying that, and then being able to help them release those energies within that areas of their life?
So a lot of theta is releasing those limiting beliefs. And so when we find an emotion that is trapped in the whole belief, just like what you said, when I can't remember the author of the book, feeling, gosh, I'll have to come back to that one, but feelings that you never really, if you don't release the feelings, they never die. They just get buried. So no feelings. Oh gosh. Anyway, the whole idea that when we don't acknowledge, accept, and process our feelings, they get trapped in our body, and then they cause the disease. Just like you're saying, when you don't breathe, when you don't process things, everything gets backed up and stopped up. So working with identifying the feeling, and grief is usually an overwhelming compilation of other things that were stuck on the way. It's not just grief. That's just kind of the outer layer of the onion there. And recently I worked with a client. She came to me for an energy reading, and you can't prepare for these things. We allow the intuition to tell us what it is. And so as I'm looking at her heart chakra, because that's where grief is held, and I'm not seeing a whole lot of grief. I see a whole lot of anger going on. And the grief is there, but it's just not really showing up. There's some betrayal. There's some, all those other things going on. And then she says, well, what do you mean you don't see grief? I'm like, okay, what am I missing here? Well, her husband had recently passed away. Mm-hmm. And so, but she had so much anger still. He died, he cheated, he got out of the bills, he got out of all of this craziness going on. And she was still so angry at him that she didn't begin to process what she thought was grief. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to start working through those anger issues. And when the anger was addressed, then she was able to better address, okay, now she was back on track for where what she felt the grief would be. And so that she's been able to process that and go through that part. So yes, with theta, a lot of times it's based on the emotion, and we track that down, and that releases so many other things. Like I said, she thought it was grief, and it's like, but it really feels a lot more like anger. And when we started addressing it there, then the tears came, and she was very thankful that we were not in a public setting. So.
Great example. Yeah, that's a really great example. And then, Jeanine, I have a question for you. Right? In your experience, have you ever experienced where grief was carried from an ancestral lineage, right? It carries over, right? You want to go in and deep dive into that?
Yeah, my goodness, where do I even begin with that? But yes, so much of grief is ancestral, right? If I think about my own grief experience very recently, I remember, and maybe it was about a year ago, but my brother is doing all of this kind of ancestral research and all of that. And so he's uncovering all kinds of things. And so while we're very excited to be learning about, our family and our ancestry, particularly as Black Americans who, have people in our lineage who were enslaved, right? And so it's not easy to make those connections. So now that we're finding them, it's like, oh my goodness, this is so great. I just remember feeling this overwhelming sense of grief, though, at one point. And as someone who's very well acquainted with grief, it didn't surprise me, but I remember saying out loud one day, this can't be my own. This is too heavy. Like, it didn't match the grief I was feeling, didn't match, kind of anything in my lived experience, and as we dug deeper, we found out more about the transition of my mother's father, and in all of that research, I found out that my mother was carrying me. Like, I was in utero at this point that her father transitioned, and he was killed by the police. I mean, it was very traumatic. My mom had always said to me, oh, your grandfather died before you were born. She never said he died while I was carrying you, right? That's very different. So I just remember having that conversation with my mother and talking about her experience. And she talked about the grief that she felt. It just made so many things make sense for me. And so that was something in my lineage that was kind of passed on to me. But even when I think about other clients, when they come and they present, it could be like, because a lot of times they do come to me presenting a physical issue, right? My breathing, or my high blood pressure, or these things, and they give me an herb for it. And then I walk them through and like, okay, let's kind of really connect and get at the root cause. A lot of things there is grief in our lineage from things that people experience that they weren't able to work through. They fear, a lot of fear, will come through our language, and fears. There's a lot of grief connected to fear, and so really helping people see that what you're carrying is not just your own. Has been important, but definitely ancestral grief, particularly for diasporic people, and things that are deep in your lineage, not even just talking about your mama or your grandmama. I mean, we're talking about those ancestors unnamed, right? Mm-hmm. And so working through that, bringing that to the surface and working through that. That's why that ancestral connection and reclamation is so important to healing. We don't even understand a lot of times what's going on beneath the surface, right? But we do know a lot of times that this feels heavier than what it should be. And that's a lot of times because it's not just a representation of what you've been through. It's something in the lineage that needs to be cleared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that. I mean, I asked you that question and it prompted me to think of something in my practice is that in addition to studying Chinese medicine, I also had learned a modality from a chiropractor who uses muscle testing a lot, and he calls his practice creative emotional wizardry. And basically, when people have these physical ailments in their bodies, we use muscle testing to see if, like, okay, yeah, that's exactly where we're at, and to point out with Amanda's situation, right? The person thought it was grief, but technically, really, it was another emotion. And by using these modality with the creative, with the muscle testing, those are the things that I can check for as well to see if that's really where, the issue is. But what I love about his practice is that it also helps me to identify the timeline of when that event happened that created that emotional enneagram and distress in the body, which is so cool. It's such a cool thing. And just to be able to check the timeline is like people don't realize. And for those mothers out there who are about to have children, you have no idea how much of what you're experiencing in life is going to affect your child. And so with the first things that I do when I check in the timeline is, did it happen between conception to birth? Because as soon as that baby is being created in your body, everything is being connected to them energetically, right? But I also love the practice of Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote the book of Biology of Belief. And we are taught that, cells can turn on and off, but really it's the the energetic environment that affects everything in our everyday lives. And that's a totally new topic, but I just wanted to bring that in because yes, grief can be from conception to birth, or it could also have been from a past lifetime as well. It can go that far back. So, I love this mystic stuff. It just, I can talk about this for ages. All right, I think we're up to the next break. So, the next segment, we're going to have Amanda to carry this on for us. Thank you.
Good stuff.
A life empowered is closer than you think. We're all looking for a better way. Reimagine what's next with a new sense of exuberance. Why not power on like you mean it? Or power off blissfully? A better sleep is a better awake. You've never moved like this before. With the energy nature intended. Imagine reprogramming the way you look at the speed of science, at longevity, at exhilaration. It's next level rejuvenation. Take control of your well-being from the inside out and outside in. The light within is ready to ignite. Be the light. LifeWave.
She looks like she has it all together, but inside, she's exhausted, disconnected, and asking, is this really it? I'm Amanda Beth. I help visionary women shift from burnout to embodiment, from survival mode to soulful success.
Especially because we've been emotional caretakers. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of others. We can't.
Through intuitive healing and aligned strategy, I guide them back to their power so they can lead with clarity, confidence, and calm. How does it feel, Christy?
That's so funny. I just had this wave of lightheadedness, and then like something lifted off my shoulders. That's how I felt.
This isn't about pushing harder. This is about rising with purpose, prosperity, and peace. Okay, and we are back. And as we've been talking about, life's journeys can really bring some big shifts, and sometimes we need that support to navigate them. And so I'm Amanda Beth, as we've talked about earlier. I'm an intuitive healer and wellness coach, and I've spent decades walking alongside people as they heal, transform, and awaken to their true potential. So from moments of crisis to breakthroughs and understanding, the goal is always the same. It's to help you find clarity, balance, and a deeper connection to yourself. And so as Jeanine brought in, this whole grief and gratitude in the same thing, is talking about different rituals and some herbal connections that we can make that kind of help that walk through that. And Dawn's talked about all the things that go on in our body when we don't allow the flow of energy, if you will, from not taking your breaths correctly. And, then everything else just kind of falls behind that, that first breath of life and how we process things. So looking at all of that stuff, looking at that, the ancestral thing, and Jeanine bringing that up, my dad, the more I was in labor for a very long time with my daughter, 72 hours. Yes. But in the process of that, she was fine. I was fine. But my dad was supposed to come out of the hospital that day. And instead I got a phone call that, he'd had a cardiac arrest. And so being close to the hospital, I went there. And, so in between contractions, I was watching them, code him, and he did not survive. And my daughter didn't need born on the same day my dad died. And so looking at how we hold and process that, I was discharged from the hospital to go to his funeral and come back. And I think the point in my story here is that grief comes on its own time frame. It comes when it's ready to be processed, when it needs to be processed. And we don't often have a lot of choice in that. For my dad, I had this beautiful bundle of a perfect human. I did not grieve his death. Her 5th birthday came around and I was a basket case. And it's like, why is life so, because you never grieved that loss. And so I was able to identify it and to process it. And, and at this point in time, we all talk about my dad and the fun things about him and all of those things. And I think it's just really important to honor those feelings, because feelings, they have to be processed. If you don't process them, they get suppressed, they come back, they cause disease, they cause your body to stop functioning, and then you really are at a loss. So looking at that whole ancestral connection there, I think this also talks in, how our ancestors dealt with grief and gratitude. We bring those values with us. And in Theta, we clear those ancestral values. It's like, that was theirs to deal with. That's not yours. You don't need to carry this baggage along with you. But some of that is the traditions that we have, in our current families, and looking at how we do that. So, and in my life, I've always been the crisis manager. And I've done it in my careers. I've done it for my family. I've done it for everything. And I look at my pattern of functioning, and a crisis happens. I jump in, I jump into that masculine energy. I take care of everybody. I do all the things. And then 3 or 4 months later, it's like, ooh, now I feel that. And I give myself permission to feel those feelings. And so that's what I think is really important. And so I'd like to take our shift, not necessarily how the person who is grieving needs to do things, because I think we've covered some really awesome tips and tricks there, but I think in more how we respond to that person. I think that oftentimes when people lose someone, because our biggest grief that we're talking about today is more about losing people and our loved ones. And I know a lot of people are like, I will never love again. If I don't ever love anybody, I can't be hurt like this. And so I think that as a caring, supportive individual, that we, they talk about grief groceries that went around social media, where don't ask someone who's just had a significant loss what you can do. Just show up with grief groceries. When my first husband was killed, my mom came. She drove, she got there. She was in Iowa, I was in New York. And so she showed up and she took me to the grocery store, a sobbing, blobbing mess. And she's buying all this toilet paper. It's like, I live alone now. I don't need all this toilet paper. And she brought, paper plates and forks. And she says, people will be coming. And to this day, when I learn of someone losing someone, that's one of the first things I think of. The $1 bills that were in those sympathy cards so that I could go get coffee. The little sticky notes of, keep track of things here. So those things that we do, they're judgment free. We just do them. And when you are around someone and you want to support them, understand that they're not going to be able to ask you for help. You know what the day their trash day is. Just go take the tote to the curb for them. Don't wait for them to ask, because they're not going to be able to do that. And so I guess I would like to know, Jeanine, what suggestions do you have looking in from the outside of how we can help someone and honor their feelings and honor their traditions and yet be supportive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such I love how you're shifting the conversation, because this is an important and often overlooked kind of part of the conversation around grief and ingratitude. And we can never underestimate just the power of presence, right? When someone has experienced loss, in this case, we're talking about the loss of a loved one. They don't need our performance. There's nothing we can do right? And so I think it starts with presence, holding space, and just sitting with them in grief. If I think about kind of my ancestry, or kind of African traditions, but a lot of nationalities, peoples have sitting with the grief, sitting with it. Sit and let's be sad. Let's grieve well, right? Because that's part of it, that grieving well. Because when we don't grieve well, it gets pushed down. And so the power of presence, I think, is important. And so even if we're going to then try to lighten the load by doing certain tasks, it all starts with presence. Be present with them. That's the beauty of it. It's the presence, and not jump into performance. And there are ways to be in presence and still cooking meal, right? But I'm cooking this meal because I'm holding space and I'm being present with you, not I'm cooking this meal because I don't know what else to do. Like, we're just busy now, and we're putting all this busy, wild, weird energy when they really just want presence. There is so much power in presence. And so that's what really comes to me, because there are cycles, parts of grief. Because then, in African traditions, there is also dance, movement, right? And that finding the joy is also part of the grief process. But it starts with presence and really holding space for the heaviness, and not feeling like we need to shift that or change that. That matters so much for those of us, in that moment of grief, that someone is just being present, holding space, that yes, this is absolutely horrible. Yes, this feels like we're never going to breathe again. And we can honor that moment. We don't have to be so in a hurry to move it on to something else, or to So presence over performance is what I would say.
Absolutely. And I remember, in different times, especially when my husband was killed, and no one knew what to say. So they would avoid you like the plague, and I know I catch myself when I see other people say, I care and I love you and I will do anything I can. And I'm not asking you how you're doing today, but know that I care. Because most of the time we're doing fine until somebody asks us, and then we really lose it. At least that's been my experience, and my experience with others. Dawn, what can you throw into, kind of supporting that person through the grief process? What are some things that we haven't covered? We've covered so much today.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways of supporting those that's dealing with grief. And I think what Jeanine had said is the power of presence. That really is the thing. And allowing the person to heal and grieve in their own timeline, right? It's like, even like 2 months later, and you see that individual and they're still grieving, and you're trying to like, oh, let's go do something, let's get you out of the house. Like, you don't know what the timeline is for that individual. And then there are some people that can hold on to this feeling for a very, very long time. And I think, it's not our place really to tell them when they need to change their perspective. But it would be a good to share with them of how we can help them change the perspective so that they can go on with their daily lives and start to live again, right? And I don't like it, when I hear a lot of times, especially even for me, when I've dealt with the loss of someone really close to me, was like, get back to normalcy. What the hell is normalcy? I'm so sorry.
That's such an overrated word. Normal. Yes.
What's normal?
Normal by whose standards? Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. So can we not say that anymore, guys? But yeah, tidbit for the audience. But it's just, for me, and how I dealt with grief, and because I don't like to push upon certain things when it comes to that. But for me, what how I handle it is, I look at it as like, for the person that passed, it may not have been in a way that we would have liked, or we would have liked to experience for them, or for, for the family, whatever that may be. But how I look at life is, right now in this state that we're in, we're actually dreaming. We're in a dream state. And when we release our physical bodies and get back to soul, we're really truly living again and being existence in with the one, with the universe, and all of that is. And when I look at it from that perspective, and I look at it from the perspective of the person that I had lost and I'm grieving, I'm like, shit, I'm jealous. I'm sorry for my my language, was like, I'm jealous. You're in this beautiful place that you don't have to deal with bills and chaos and personalities. It's like, it's a totally different realm that I can't wait to get to. Like, I want to get to that bliss area. And so when I look at it from that perspective, it helps me to deal with the grief that I'm feeling. And I also like to connect with the feeling that that individual made me feel, the love and joy that person made me feel. I can feel that way again with other people. It doesn't have to necessarily be that connection that I had with that individual. And so those are just some of those perspectives that I would throw out there to help people, when dealing with grief. And just, again, it's the definitions, right, that we hold. And really, life has no meaning until we give it a definition and the meaning of it. So yeah, that's sorry guys, that's my take on it.
I think and that's where when Jeanine brought this topic up, grief and gratitude. No one ever asked anyone on this panel, have you experienced grief? We just assume, because it is. And I think that that's kind of one of my interests of grief is one of the most commonly experienced emotions among everyone, but it is one of the least understood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of sets the tone of where we're at and where we need to be going with this, and allowing that grace for people to experience the grief the way that they need to. If you're an employer, you've got 3 days and they need to be back. Unless they're working part-time and you don't have a policy for part-time people that lose someone. And so when we turn these things over to society to define them, it makes it really, really difficult, because then we're trying to normalize that word we've already agreed to ban, how things happen, and they don't. And so I think that's where we are grateful that we have the ability to identify the emotion, to feel it and process it, and to move forward with that as a learning and growing experience for ourselves. And I reflect back to those jars. We're going to grow our jar bigger so that we are a bigger, we're more adapted to handle that grief as it comes along. So any parting comments before we leave? Did we bring this to a good spot?
Yeah, I think so. Great discussion.
Okay. So if today's episode spoke to you, don't go it alone. Book your free consult with any one of our expert coaches at chronichealthcollective.com for personalized support, and definitely subscribe to our monthly newsletter for expert tips from all 14 of our coaches to elevate your health, mindset, and relationships. Catch us live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central, just like you did tonight, or watch past episodes at any time on E360 TV or youtube.com/@chronichealthcollective. Thanks for tuning in. Your transformation starts now. See you next week.
Bye.